Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Joel Clark for another episode of Wuxia Workshop. Today we're going to be talking about the movie Brave Archer. This is a 1977 film directed by Chang Cheh. It's a little different than a lot of Chang Cheh films. I don't know how, if you feel like you have a handle on them yet, Joel, but this one probably struck you as a little bit different from films like The One-Armed Swordsman and maybe some of the others that we've seen by him. And yeah, so I guess before we get into this one, and I should say, this is a part of a trilogy. It's actually more than a trilogy, but there's Brave Archers 1 through 3, and then there's Brave Archer and his mate, which gets into the next story. But we're going to just be focused on Brave Archer 1 through 3, which deals with the first book of the Condor Heroes trilogy, which is Legend of Condor Heroes. So. Joel, what was your reaction to this movie? Because I know that this is a story we've talked about, and you seemed interested in getting to this one. So,
yeah, I really liked it. I'll tell you that I didn't think it didn't feel like part one of a trilogy or a hexology. It felt like a complete movie, even more so than movies that didn't have a sequel. Like I was surprised at how well everything tied up with a bow at the end. So like it's first of all, it is really entertaining. There's a lot of colorful characters. It's got an extremely strong and like noticeable unity to it, which again, a lot of the other ones we've watched, like because I'm watching them expecting that 3-act structure, and they have like that 5 or 6-act structure. They feel stilted or like a little awkward in their pacing.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel that so much in this one. It does the thing where it kind of leaps between time and place in a way I'm not used to. But it's got a real structure to it that's makes it really a joy to watch. So yeah, I greatly enjoyed this movie. I could have used more fighting, but the fighting that we did get had some really cool stuff in it. Like there's a flute battle at the end with evil music. And, like, you gotta love that kind of stuff. You just don't see that, in other places.
I'm surprised you didn't find that there was enough fighting in this. I guess it doesn't lean as heavily on the fighting as some of the other movies. And there's a lot of room for the characters themselves to kind of get to know each other. And so, I guess for a Chang Cheh movie, it is a little more balanced in terms of the fight content to the story content. But especially what was that?
A lot of times, like, they would start fighting, then the camera would pan over to a character who was watching the fight, and they'd just be like, how interesting, and it would focus on them, and they started a conversation while a fight was happening off camera. And I was like, okay, so that's what we're doing with this movie.
Yeah, and even a lot of the fight scenes, the stakes are not always necessarily that high. There's a lot of instances in this movie and in the story where rather than have an actual fight, they'll say, okay, let's balance these cups of wine, or let's not be like commoners and have a duel to the death. In order to determine who gets to marry my daughter, I want you guys to have 3 contests. The first of which is to, whoever can stay in the tree the longest while fighting and not hitting the ground, wins. The second is I want you to follow the beat to my flute music, and then the third is to recite from memory a page from my wife's book that I show you, and which is like the 9 Yin manual, which is a very important MacGuffin in the story. But
this is a MacGuffin. That's great.
Well, there's a lot of
MacGuffin,
that.
It does stuff.
Huh?
Like if you learn something from the quote unquote MacGuffin, it's no longer a MacGuffin. It did a thing that makes it a plot device.
Oh, I didn't realize that there were parameters on when
there
something...
are parameters to a MacGuffin can't do anything.
Oh, okay. I thought a MacGuffin was just the thing that, like, is sort of driving the plot in some way. That's sort of like an object that people are after, but I didn't realize that it.
You're right, but like you have to draw a line, because a plot device lets something interesting happen that can create plot. A MacGuffin doesn't do that. Just by existing, it makes the plot happen. So the Maltese Falcon is a MacGuffin, but and even like the Ark of the Covenant, because all it really did was like end the movie. Mm-hmm. That's a MacGuffin. Okay. But like this, I don't know. Like almost everything in Indiana
So
Jones
this wouldn't be a MacGuffin then, because this is like threaded through the whole story in a number of different ways. It's part of how Huang Yaoshi, the master of Peach Blossom Island's wife, died. it's important to that. It's how he it's the thing that enables Guo Jing and Huang Rong to get married, and it's also it contains important techniques that are used throughout the movie. So I guess it.
The only thing that makes it not a MacGuffin is that last thing. Because remember, if the manual itself is making all the plot happen and it doesn't fucking do anything, MacGuffin. If it does stuff, not a MacGuffin.
Oh, okay, I get you.
It's a fine line.
Okay, that's
it might be a MacGuffin within the context of this movie, where it just because I don't think anyone uses the techniques in it within the movie, do they?
But how do you draw a line between the manual doing something and the manual causing something in the plot to happen? I'm like. So, for example, if the wife dies because she's reciting the Nine Yin manual as she's reading it, is that a MacGuffin act or is that a plot device?
I think it's more. I think that's a little more MacGuffin. I think it's closer to plot device. Okay. But like a plot device is the thing about a plot device is that it can basically like open up like a chest full of events and make something happen. Whereas a MacGuffin just kind of sits there and people are like, oh, let's make stuff happen around it.
Okay.
So there's a kind of a blurry line between causality that is the distinguishing factor. Or rather, that's how I've come to understand it from my obsession with reading TV tropes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not a big TV tropes reader, so I might. But I've just heard MacGuffin. I've heard MacGuffin in conversations mainly with role playing games. But I guess to bring it back to the Brave Archer series, did you have any? So the combat, character development, there was quite a bit of balance. What did you think of the story in general, and was there anything that you found confusing or perplexing about it?
There's a really actually a lot of the movies we've been watching do this, and I think this is just an Eastern style, like Chinese style movie making technique. It feels like they totally forget about something because they leap so far forward in time or to such a different setting that you're like, oh, I guess we're not doing that now. But then like a scene or two later, that'll come back. Like at the very beginning of the movie. And I want to talk about this one kind of in the stages in which it happens because it is well constructed and it kind of would help structure the conversation. Like at the beginning of the movie, two kids are born and like their parents meet this wandering Taoist guy, and the Jin army are invading China, which it's a historical event. Actually, it's one of the things that Legends of the Wulan is based off of. Is whenever the Jin had just conquered.
Yeah, this is like as the northern China is being conquered by the Jin.
Yeah, it's in the process of happening in this movie. But like the kids, like their parents get like killed by Jin, and then there's like this rivalry thing that happens because what do they call the Weird Seven or the Weird
Seven Freaks? The Seven Freaks.
Is that what they're called?
They're also called the Weird Seven, but Seven Freaks is the name that I the translation I first encountered. So
I love the Seven Freaks. Like, and like, what's the okay? You're gonna have to inform me about like because they're called weird and or freaks. What does that mean culturally when you say that in China? Because I don't. When I think freaks,
I don't know.
Like
I have a good friend who would know the answer to that and remind me, and I'll make a point of getting an answer on that question, and maybe we could even get a little mini episode out of it because I've often wondered that myself, and I don't know. I just assumed it meant something kind of like a weirdo. Because they're all kind of eccentric, and you know they're and there's other characters later on that sort of mirror this group that are equally strange in the sequel. But I'm not sure what the and sometimes what I discover when I delve into this stuff is that freaks is just something that was used as a translation for some bizarre reason, and it has nothing to do with it. But I'll also sometimes find out when I delve into these things that there's it means what it sounds like. So like we just did the Last Hurrah for Chivalry last week, and the friend that I'm talking about was on the program, and he said that the name of the movie in Chinese is actually just like something like chivalrous hero, basically, or great hero. A lot
more generic, and there's no hurrah in there.
But somehow in the English translation, it became the Last Hurrah for Chivalry. But in the book, in all the translations I've seen, they're usually the Seven Freaks of Jiangnan, and I think it might even be. Oh wait, I got it right here. It's Jiangnang Chi Guai. So I don't know if that's like Guai is in like a ghost type thing, like maybe like monstrosity, but we'll get a more knowledgeable person on the program at some point to break that down for us.
Yeah, because I know the Yao Guai means monster, or like the equivalent of the term like monster or goblin. So it might even be like the seven forest goblins or something like that.
But the tricky thing there is because of the tones, you could have the same sound mean like 5 different things. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's why I've been burned by that so many times that I now always go to the people that know about the language. But either way, they're a really interesting group of characters, and they become the master of one of these children that was born at the start of the movie. And like you said, it advances like 18 years.
Yeah,
and
it jumps up to when they're grown-ups.
Yeah. and it's kind of a cool setup, and they really condense it here, because in the book it's there's a lot more room. This is like, I think 2 or 3 chapters at least, and maybe just 2, but it's an extended sequence where all the stuff that we see happen in that one location actually occurs over multiple locations, and there's a much more protracted battle between the Taoist and the Seven Freaks, and the battle
that's a little curtailed. Because like they just jump in, they're like, "Oh, let's fight!" And then like 2 seconds later, it's like, "Whoa, hey, everyone!"
No, in the book and in most versions and TV series and stuff, there's this really great fight at an inn, and then they fight at a temple, and the Taoist basically says, "Okay, we'll I'll go get the other kid. You train this kid, and in 18 years we'll continue our battle. Seeing who trained them best." I apologize. My voice seems to be vanishing.
Sorry about that. That
no,
sucks.
It's okay. But the other thing that is missed in the book, or not in the book, in the movie, is there's a whole subplot about the Mongols that you don't see at all. You only see a glimpse of it here, where when they advance 18 years after the start of the film, Guo Jing is living in like a Mongolian tent. But they don't really comment on that much in the movie. But in the book, he's actually under the protection of Genghis Khan, and Genghis Khan is an important character in the story. So there's also a subplot where Guo Jing is promised to the daughter of Genghis Khan, and so in addition to Guo Jing and Huang Rong having to get over the hurdle of getting her father to allow them to get married, after that's done, Guo Jing has to get over the hurdle of his promise to the Mongolian princess, and he has to get out of that marriage. So there's a lot of stuff that the movie sort of strips away for purposes of keeping things flowing, and they wouldn't have been able to tend to all these threads, I think. And so
it's a full movie, so and it doesn't feel pared down. I mean, clearly it must be somewhat. I might compare it to Romance of the Three Kingdoms is probably another similar one, where like when you see a movie of that book, like they have to focus on the battle they want to fight with it.
Yeah,
they're like, okay, this is just going to be about Cao Cao, and it's just going to be for like these 3 battles, and that's it. Like was it a Jackie Chan or Jet Li movie where they did that? There was a really famous version of Romance of the Three Kingdoms that was done fairly recently, where that was basically what they did. They're like, no, we're just focusing on like 4 characters out of the 800 in that novel. So,
are you thinking of Redcliffe?
I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I don't think Jet Li or Jackie Chan were in that one though. But
I remember who it was. It was someone I recognized by name, and I'm like,
well, I think John Woo directed it.
Yeah, no, it was an actor. It was one of the actors. They played Cao Cao, and I can't remember who it is now. It could have been like there's more actors that I would recognize by name. I just can't some of them to mind now.
But that's a good movie. That's a really good movie, by the way. But,
I need to grab it.
Yeah, I picked it up on Blu-ray again actually, and I need to watch it again because it's been a few years. But it's a long movie, so I was like, well, I'm gonna wait for the right day because I think it's like the full version. So I mean, it's quite a long movie. But yeah, I think overall the movie succeeds in getting even though, like you said, they have to do this time skips, and some of the time skips are in the book, some of them are not, but but it really does get all of the plot beats. And this is the kind of film where this is a popular novel. This is not a minor story in China, so this is something where there's an assumed familiarity with the source material that the audience would have. And so one of the complaints that you might sometimes get when people see this film or similar movies is, well, it's confusing. But I'm sorry?
I didn't get that so much. Mostly because I agree with you that there are some things where I'm like, I probably would have got this better if I was Chinese, or if I just was very familiar with like Condor heroes. Like halfway through the movie, right? The what is it, Peach Blossom Princess, whatever her name is, finds a new master for. Well, okay, so. By the way, is there an archer in this movie? I didn't see an archer. I want to call the main guy.
Yes, there is an archer. The archer is Guo Jing. Guo Jing is the archer. In the original Condor Heroes story, he shoots. I think he kills a hawk with an arrow in like a really skilled shot. He might even hit two at once. I can't remember the circumstances, but
that's rad.
But he's because he's raised by the Mongolians, and so he learns how to use a bow, and that's one of his great skills. He accumulates a number of other skills, so he isn't always fighting with arrows. But he's I guess it's kind of not that common, like a hero whose big skill is firing a bow in a Wuxia story.
That's interesting. Anyway, but no, she finds him a new master, and the way she does this is a hobo wanders up to their camp and she feeds him a chicken, and it's like, will you teach the 18 dragon palms to my boyfriend here? And he's like, you know who I am. Okay, I will, because I'm this great hero. That's an introduction. And to a Western audience, like, who is this guy? But to an Eastern audience, it's like the equivalent would be like, oh, that's Robin Hood, or like, oh, it's Lancelot. You know who? You don't need to introduce him more. We know who that is.
And that character is Hong Shigong. He is the leader of Beggar Sect. So he's an important character in the story, and he's and I think also part of the thing that she was trying to do there, I can't remember in the book if this was the case or not, but I think, if I remember, part of her motivation was helping to prepare Guo Jing to be a suitable husband for her when he meets her father.
Yes, he uses those techniques.
Yeah. So I think she was trying to up his martial talents so that the father would be more impressed. But I could be wrong on that.
Well, going back to the linear sequence, right after they take Hua Jing, the seven freaks do, and they train him and they jump to him being an adult, and like they're watching him spar, and they're all like, oh man, we fucked this up. His kung fu sucks. All right, you go take him to this abandoned mountain place and keep training him, because this is embarrassing. And they do, and they're just jumped by this guy who can crack through skulls with his fingers. Kills Guo Jing's master, and out of sheer luck, he stabs the dude, who goes off to his wife and dies. And I want you to take over everything cool about those two, that pair, because they are really neat.
Okay, so that's Copper Corpse and Iron Corpse. So Copper Corpse is, I think, Chen Juanfeng, and Iron Corpse is Mei Chaofeng. And Mei Chaofeng is one of my favorite characters in the whole story. I think she's tremendous, and I think the woman who played her here is one of the better versions that I've ever seen. She gets the martial arts right, and she also just gets the personality. She just really nails it. But basically, they stole the manual from Huang Yaoshi, who is the master of Peach Blossom Island, and he ended up crippling his remaining apprentices, and that's sort of the backstory to all this. And so they're sort of in hiding, and they're trying to use the 9 yin white bone claw technique, I think. And so that's what they're using when he's training on those skulls, the sort of soft clay skulls that he's putting his fingers in. That's the bone claw technique that he's using. And Copper Corpse, he's one of these guys that's made most of his body invincible except for his navel. So when Guo Jing fights him, he stabs him with the dagger in the navel, and then that begins the grudge between her and him and the seven freaks, and she ends up killing one of the seven freaks, and then years later he has another encounter with her. But when the Seven Freaks try to get their revenge, they blind her, and so she's one of these maimed heroes in the story. But despite being blind, she's still a pretty terrifying character. So yeah, and she also, I think she uses the some kind of bone whip or something, or boa whip in the story. But
the actress who plays her has an amazing presence. I'd like to point out, like, she's really genuinely, like, not only in the way she characterizes it, but in the way that everybody reacts whenever she hits the scene. Because, like, she'll wander and they'll be like, "Hey, who is that terrifying woman?" Someone will name drop her, or she'll, like, name drop herself, and everyone's like, "Oh crap!"
Yeah, no, yeah, and that's usually when she's depicted. She's always depicted with having that kind of a presence, and I think this actress really got that down very well. She probably said, I mean, I don't know of any earlier depictions, so she might have even set the standard, unless there was like a TV series that was earlier. But what ends up happening over time is you do see, like, if you watch a version of Legend of Condor Heroes, the costuming and the stance and the characterization, just in sort of the physical presentation of them, has all been fairly set. And so usually when you see Mei Chao Feng now, you know right away that it's Mei Chao Feng. And also the name.
Helpful.
I'm sorry?
That's neat and helpful. Like, if I see a guy in green leotards, I know that's Robin Hood.
Yeah,
you know, so it's kind of a similar thing.
It's similar to that. Like Guo Jing, you kind of know it's Guo Jing. We should probably talk about Guo Jing and Huang Rong, because they're the main characters. And I don't know if you picked up on this, but Guo Jing's not the smartest guy in the world. He's kind of
he's not great at anything. It's wonderful. He's such a moron, and everyone even says that. Like, he'll act it out. Like, he nails this part, and like, people will say that to him, like, "Well, you're kind of dumb, but thankfully we don't have to be smart to do this." Because he is a good student. He learns dutifully. He's respectful.
He's a good person. He's very simple, and he and in the story it's a little more complicated why his abilities aren't progressing and how he gets over it. But eventually he, almost just through effort and having a good heart, he kind of gets to. He improves. Like, every time he meets a big master that wants to train him, they teach him because he's like a good person, basically, or he impresses them with his how respectful he is. And so in this we get to see that with him learning from Hong Qigong, and we also get to see it from him learning from Zhu Batong, the guy on Peach Blossom Island, who's a little bit mad when he meets him. That teaches him like the four-fisted fighting style, and also helps prepare him for the marriage test by having him recite the manual. And Huang Rong is almost the opposite of him. Huang Rong is really, really smart. That's one of her defining traits, and very, not just smart, but very quick-witted, and maybe a little bit more rule bending than Guo Jing.
A little?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she's at least a little more rule bending. I really like her. Again, they chose their actors and actresses really well, and you get a real kind of Loki trickster vibe out of Huang Rong over the whole movie. Like, because she's introduced as like a beggar.
Yeah.
Like, she's stealing stuff. And she's the daughter of an incredibly powerful and influential, like, kung fu god, basically. And yeah, she's just like, no, F that. I'm gonna go be a beggar. I'm gonna go steal food. She tricks the fellow. I didn't write the names down this time. I feel like an idiot. What's that?
The hero?
Yeah, the hero. I'm just gonna call him the hero.
Yeah, he's Guo Jing.
Guo Jing. I'm gonna have to write them down just a second. Guo Jing. I'm not gonna spell it right.
I'm probably not even pronouncing it right, so it's not a big deal. But like, over time, these names will become familiar to you. I assure you.
No, I mean, like, because like I know names like Lu Bu and stuff like that. So like, you get familiar with them.
Yeah.
You also get familiar with the Chinese name conventions where like they'll give someone like 8 different names and they're used contextually by different characters. And like at first you're just baffled by that, and then like after a while you're like, oh no, it's just his nickname. Oh no, that's his childhood name. Oh no, that's like they're just like second nature after a little while.
Yeah, because I think she calls him Jingaga or something like that. Some kind of,
Yep.
I think like brother Jing or something. So,
Yeah, everyone has a little pet name, and like it's not like our culture doesn't do that. I've got a million names if you think about it that way, because my wife has a name for me, my mom has a name for me, my kids have a name for me, my friends have a name for me. Same thing, you know. And like if you add in like the complexity of like handles online and stuff like that, I must have 30 names, and that's just not
that's
my
true.
yeah. There's just that, and then like that's even ignoring like my name as an importance to my family. Like my first name is actually the name of my father's deceased best friend.
Okay.
Just so like yeah, exactly like you do it in like a Chinese naming convention. I've got a middle name, I've got a last name, so I've got a surname. Like names are like,
But our
they're
middle
like
name,
that.
I have to say, our middle names are pretty meaningless these days, wouldn't you say? Like my middle name's Matthew,
pretty
and I don't think I've
beneficial.
ever used it for anything.
I don't. No one even cares.
Yeah.
Like if I tell them my middle name, they're like, "Your middle name is stupid," and I'm like, "Yeah, let's move on." 'cause
What is your
we're
middle
never
name?
gonna
Now I have
remember
to
it.
know.
What? My
What?
middle name's Tyler. My mom thought it was a very
There,
fancy.
there are
sounding-
worse middle names than Tyler for sure.
They're totally worse middle names.
You know, you could be named Rupert. Rupert would be a pretty bad middle name. Apologies to all the Ruperts in the world,
You've suffered enough, Ruperts of the world.
but anyways, we're getting a little bit short on time, so we only got about 20 minutes. So I want to get into the gaming
God.
stuff. But before we do, was there anything else about the story that you noticed that you wanted to talk about?
One thing. There was one thing that I couldn't stop noticing. Every fight had a gimmick and a rule. We're not going to really fight. We're going to play with these cups, like you mentioned. Every fight was like that.
Yes.
It was great.
I think if there's an essential quality to these stories by Louis Cha, it's the inventiveness. Whether it's with the characters or the situations or the little flourishes around the fights, like okay, we're not gonna have a real fight. You're gonna have to tiptoe across this bridge and be the first to grab that peach on the hill. Like there's always these details, and they usually stem very, very believably from the characters. So when Huang Yaoshi has the 3 tests for he's promised Huang Rong, his daughter, to 2 people, to Guo Jing because Hong Qigong asks for it, and to Ouyang Ke, the nephew of Ouyang Feng, who's one of the great villains in the story. And he has them undergo these 3 tests, and all of those tests are a pure reflection of Huang Yaoshi's eccentric scholarly personality. He's this eccentric flute playing scholar, and so yeah, inventiveness I think is really the key feature of these stories.
That was a cool ultimate battle for that movie, by the way. It was really enjoyable.
It was, and what I think you don't see in the movies that you see on the page when you read these books is over the course of, so they're always divided, I think, into 40 chapters, usually like 10 chapters per book. So you usually have like 4 books for each of the stories in the trilogy. Is just the endlessly inventive nature of them. You're just from chapter to chapter, so many characters being introduced, so many little plot details being introduced. It's just crammed with little details that are surprising at every turn. I can't recommend these enough. Unfortunately, if you're going for Condor Heroes, only the first book of the first trilogy has been officially translated into English, but you can get fan translations online. And again, so because we are running low on time today, we do need to get into the gaming stuff. And I think there's a lot of gaming material here. I have a list of things, but did anything leap out at you while you were watching it? If not, I'm happy to go into mine.
Oh man, lots and lots of cool goons. That was probably the biggest thing where I was like, this is really gameable. There's lots of mini bosses, there's lots of sub bosses, lots of colorful bad guy characters. So like, really cool stuff right there. Also, there's a scene where they're lost in this Taoist peach garden and they can't get out of it because it's like this magical architecture. That for me, like, I really liked that. I like dungeons that are unusual in that way. So I want to put that in a game now.
And I would even comment in this movie did a particularly good job of that, because I've seen that in a bunch of different series, and it's always very hit or miss how they represent that, because it's described oddly in the book. It's an odd concept, and visually expressing that on screen is difficult, I think. And they did a very good job here.
It's one of those things that if you're in a peach garden, it's easy to get lost. I've been in them, but like, seeing it, you're like, why are they lost? It's like, you got to be there, man. Trust me, it's really disorienting.
Well, and that's an area where knowledge of relevant cultural information on the part of the character could be important. Where like if you know about the bagua, then you would be able to navigate it more easily than somebody who doesn't. But another thing that I noticed about it watching it this time, and this is something I've kind of always used this story and its sequels as a model for how characters ought to learn techniques and abilities in a wuxia campaign. So, like you were commenting on how they won over Hong Qigong by offering him food and all that. I like this idea, number one, of happy coincidences, like having like maybe a table where you might have great masters that there's a chance of characters encountering just through random chance and circumstance, but also having when players do encounter those kinds of figures, having it be very much a chemistry thing, like in this case, Guo Jing and Hong Qigong are a good pairing. Hong Qigong is going to naturally want to teach Guo Jing his abilities if they do enough to impress him. But he's probably not going to learn anything from Wu Yongfeng. Do you know what I mean? So I think that just sort of knowing where the tech, and again, this is going to be very dependent on the system you're using, because I'm largely going by Ogre Gate, where you have discrete martial arts techniques. But knowing where the techniques reside in your setting, so whether it's in manuals like the Nine Yin manual, which we see in the movie, or whether it's in the characters, whether it's in Hong Qigong or Huang Yaoxi, and turning those moments into more than just a conversation where a person asks for a technique, where there's like a challenge and there's a something interesting going on. This is sort of like if I had to give my ideal of how that stuff plays out in a campaign, the Condor Heroes trilogy really nails it for me.
Yeah, and I concur. Listen to me. I concur. Like, and I found that in almost every kung fu system, either that I've encountered or now the one that I'm designing, like, that's a really important thing, knowing where the techniques reside. Like you said, that's a beautiful way of putting that. Because in a game where you fail to do that, you lose, you just basically drop this extremely important and game-defining element to no gain.
Yeah.
I don't want to go and rip into Exalted, but I will complain about it in this very limited sense that your techniques aren't something you go out and find. You just kind of learn them sometimes. And that really drops one of the more interesting aspects of the setting, which is going and finding a master. However, they do it in one circumstance, which is peculiar but fascinating. One of the martial arts types, the Sidereals, or like the Star Exalted, they have to treat martial arts that way. They have to find a master and then learn them from that master. So in that one place, Exalted is like, oh, you know what? We're going to do it right.
Mm-hmm.
Peculiar. But yeah, Legends of the Wulin, you had to find techniques by enmeshing yourself with whoever knew them, which could get really complicated. Weapons of the Gods was similar. Legends of Ogre Gate, I'm baking that right into my game. So like, yeah, I love that. I love that because it gives players a reason to go and invest in the setting and interact with the characters. And like, hey, that weird beggar we met, let's go and talk to him again. He seems like he might be that legendary beggar king, and he knows the dog beating stick technique or whatever.
No, and in fact, I kind of did a spin on this where, because Hong Qigong's thing is obviously food, so I had a very eccentric beggar chief in one of my campaigns, and the spin on it was that he was fond of food, but he was fond of like rotten fermented food, and so the characters had to find a way to the characters had to find a way to number one, impress him with their own culinary skill, but also they had to be able to stomach the cuisine that he was eating. And so one of the characters succeed. The beggar character was the one who I think managed to consume the rancid food and impress the beggar chief sufficiently that they became friends. So
that's tough.
Yeah, so, but that was directly inspired by Hong Qigong. Do you know what I mean? Like that was that and you see even more of it when you get into the Return of Condor hero story, the second one, which is actually my favorite. There you see. I'm sorry.
It's coming up next.
No. So Return of Condor Heroes is a separate story. It's the second part of the trilogy. Okay. So what we're seeing is the first story. So we're going to go from episodes 1 through 3. And if we choose to, we could continue with Brave Archer and his mate, and then follow that up with Little Dragon Maiden, I believe. And we might get we might get much of the Return of Condor Heroes story. But I think honestly, the best way to encounter Return of Condor Heroes is to either read it or watch a series, because I don't think it's been. Brave Archer does a good job of getting the first story down, but I don't feel like the Brave Archer and his mate is the best introduction to Return of Condor Heroes. But and also there's we'll get into that when we get that far. But sorry, I have a fly assailing me here, so I'm a little bit distracted. But yeah, so with techniques, I think that's an important thing. I also think another thing that this story does is it gets a really good mix of allies and villains. And I find that a lot of, like, my own natural inclination as a GM was always to go too far in one direction or the other. Too many villains, too many allies. And having I've discovered over time, and largely with the help of thinking about stories like this, is having a good mix of both is really important. Always having that potential when they first meet somebody. Is this somebody who's going to be an ally in the future, or is this somebody who's going to be an enemy in the future? And obviously there are people who don't fit into either category, but that, I think that makes for a much more interesting campaign in the long run. If you let the people who are useful be truly useful and helpful to them, and you let the people who are villainous be truly villainous and challenging to them, that really can intensify a campaign more, and also get the players appreciate having helpful allies. Do you know what I mean? Like that's the thing that's really easy to overlook. Somebody who's functionally useful to the party and willing to lend them a hand.
Yeah, you gotta be careful with the allies. I tend to Monty Hall my campaigns, just where you way over reward the players. So I'm really cautious with allies, because I have a tendency to be like, and then another 9th level wizard swears to join you. Right, and then the king of the realm is like, you would be my knights, and they just get they get like all these extra like titles and superheroes tooling around with them, and it's like I might have overstepped my bounds here.
Well, I have sort of a naturalistic way of managing that. Like if they, like, say the players accumulate a retinue over time, I don't want to slow down combat by rolling for every character necessarily the way I would roll for, like, normal monsters and NPCs. And if they have a retinue of heroes with them, what I usually do is I usually just reduce them to like dice pools based on their level, and whoever they're going up against, it'll be the same thing. So if they have a hero who's Chi rank 7 going up against a Chi rank 3, it'll be 3d10 against 7d10, and in any given battle, that might result in one of their allies dying. You know what I mean? So, that over time, I think natural mortality rates will kick in if they're really drawing heavily on these people, and that'll kick in whether you're using that simplified method or rolling for everybody. The simplified method is just because I want to cut down on time. But if I were, rolling for all the characters, if I were rolling for all the characters, there'd probably actually be more character death, because I'd be using specific techniques, and the lethality might actually go up a little bit. But yeah, so that's obviously you have to be careful. But I think I don't know. as a GM, I tend to be maybe a little bit stingy is maybe my natural inclination. So I have to remind myself to be more generous with the allies and people that are functionally useful to them.
All right, so that's a good question. What's the ideal ratio of allies and reward? Like, could we talk about that way in a way that we could actually communicate that to a new GM? Like, okay, you want it to look kind of like this. Do we have any good examples?
I'm very reluctant to quantify anything for the simple reason that anytime games quantify that kind of thing, it becomes this ball and chain that you're latched to. Do you know what I mean?
Like the challenge rating stuff.
Yeah. And so the challenge rating stuff is sort of my go-to example for that, where that really just killed a lot of the fun of the game for me, even though it came from like a really functional, useful thing. A GM does need to be able to know, like, how challenging is this going to be for a party?
Yeah, how dangerous is the dragon?
But I think you can go too far. So my advice wouldn't be to say, okay, we need the perfect ratio and it must always be at that ratio. It would be, just strive for a general feel of balance in your approach. If you're noticing that you've just been having too many villains lately, maybe throw in some more, friendly characters. What I would try to do is just look whenever you have running a campaign, and this is just a general principle. Take note of what some of what are your excesses, and where is there a poverty of X, and then decide whether you need to adjust things. That's how I would do it.
I think that's probably the best advice, is tying it into what are you seeing happen at the table. Yeah. The players are over relying on allies. Maybe crank up the villains a little bit. If they seem like they're really overwhelmed and having trouble and struggling, that's more allies.
Yeah, because you want to be very careful, because if you're constantly focused on, okay, I've got to have a 30 to 70 percent ratio. Like if it's got to be like, you know what I mean? If it's got to be like if you're constantly thinking of the proportions, and then and it's a moment in your campaign where that's not even a consideration because the characters are focused on getting this object from this guy or something.
Yeah, you're going to be diverting your focus in a bad way.
Yeah, because they're not going to notice it unless it's a moment of the campaign where they're going to notice it anyways. So.
Yes, and you do want to have it not always perfectly balanced. You want moments of being overwhelmed, moments of being over-rewarded. It should even out overall, not within every moment.
Yeah, because you can run into the 4E problem of parity across all time, and then that, and that's a simplification. I'm not trying to open up the chest of the 4E debate, but
let's not.
but you know what I'm saying. That idea of parity can be taken to an extreme, and I think and that idea of balance can be taken to an extreme. So I think you need like rough edges in a game. You need so I'm always sort of a from the hip kind of person. I just feel like, okay, you get a handle on this stuff, and as things come, you sort of notice, and I mean, these are sort of unavoidable, inescapable things if you're running a game. If you have a bad session, do you know what I mean? Bad sessions become pretty clear, and
your players will let you know.
Yeah, and if you don't know, just for people who aren't familiar with the social rituals involved, if people suddenly can't make it to your games and have excuses, that's a sign. So again, so I think that one of the biggest skills of being a GM is knowing when you've had some bad sessions and knowing how to adjust for that. And that can happen even if you're a great GM and you've just been, spoiled by the fact that you've had these players that are that fit well with your play style for so long, and then you shift to another group, say, and you're not as all of your techniques are not working. So it's sort of incumbent on you to read the room as best you can in every session.
We have that in common with comedians, where like if you play in front of the wrong audience with the wrong material, oops.
Yeah, no. I do think stand-up comedy is a good sort of comparison for that reason. I mean, obviously there are some massive differences too. You can't. There are certain things stand-up comedians do that a GM should never do. But
Yeah, like I get way more laughs than most stand-up comedians in my games.
well, and humor is a touchy subject at the table. I like humor, but some people don't like when people break characters for joke purpose. I think it's sort of natural to do that.
Yeah, one of those little lines where, like, again, you sometimes you don't even know. Like, convention running is nightmarish for that reason. Where, like, you'll find a group that is just woefully unsuited to your sense of humor, or when you break character, how you do it, and like even if you're a great GM, if you have years of experience, you'll just be in front of these stone-faced, humorless people who are just like, I don't understand why aren't you in character right now, and you're just like, oh, oops, oh man, okay. You've got to find yourself like adjusting on the fly to their expectations.
So, I mean, I want to get into the topic of romance in games next, but before we do that, I do want to just comment on that. I think for me, like people will do this thing where everybody's talking in character, and then suddenly something funny happens, and a person makes a joke out of character. I think that's fine because I think that adds to group cohesion, and it's so quick. And also people like laughing. Laughing's fun. So I think it's good. I do realize that there does seem to be this line where some people are fine with it, some people are totally not. But I'm happy to have humor in my games. But on the topic of romance, because this is also a romance story, there is a love story between Guo Jing and Huang Rong, and romance is obviously a tricky thing to work into a game. It can largely depend on the players involved. It can depend on what people's comfort levels are. But I think this movie offers a pretty good example of how to do it in a way that isn't awkward for everybody. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I noticed that in the game, in the movie. Like, this is the best romance I've seen, maybe in any movie. Where like it's not. They don't expect you as the audience to get super emotionally into the romance, but like you wind up naturally doing that just because you really wind up liking the characters and their chemistry together. So like tell me about it.
And there's not, there's not a lot of physical components to it. So that's that's obviously something that could again, depending on the group, but that could be sort of one of the awkward things involved. And there's not a lot. There are a few moments when like her big thing is the reason she likes him so much is when she was dressed as a beggar, he still treated her nicely. And presumably she's been doing this for a long time, and people have not been treating her well whenever she's dressed as a beggar. But then when she's dressed as a woman, they always treat her, exceptionally well. And so she's drawn to him because he treats her well regardless. And it's an emotional scene, but it's not one. It doesn't seem as I don't know. It just didn't seem quite as sappy to me as sort of your...
My grandfather would always use the term Twitter-pated from Bambi whenever he would see a thing like that. Like, that character's Twitter-pated.
What does Twitter-pated mean?
All right. So I don't know if you've ever seen Bambi.
When I was a kid.
Right. And, like, Twitter-pated was basically, like, this kind of puppy love infatuation version of, like, falling in love with someone.
Okay.
And so my grandfather latched onto that for his entire life. I heard Twitter-pated until... like he died. Okay. So like, at least a good way of characterizing it, because it's almost like mocking that sort of like gooey, sappy romance stuff that you see in media a lot.
Yeah, this is more like these guys are almost a little bit more like a great duo. Do you know what I mean? Like they're just like a really perfect team together, and so. Yes. A lot of it is even just and that's one of the cool things about the wuxia genre. You don't have to have, like, again, every campaign is different, but you don't necessarily have to have those romantic moments between the characters. A lot of that stuff can be expressed in the middle of a fight, where characters are protecting each other. And do you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of room for that stuff to kind of be more apparent in the action sequences, where it maybe is more comfortable anyways for folks. So, but I'm a big proponent of if you can have romance in the game, because I think, number one, it's an important feature of the genre, but number two, normal people get married and have kids and, all these things and have romantic attachments.
Yes.
And so I just think, if your characters aren't doing that, you're missing out on a whole area of adventure potential, of motivation to drive. It's very interesting to watch characters go from being sort of the wandering murder hobo to like a responsible father who's caring for his kids or something. There's I've seen that happen in campaigns, and it always adds longevity to this to how much fuel the campaign has. So I'd say try to do it in a way that your group is comfortable with, though. It's a fine walk for sure. But again, I think that this is a very good example. Definitely, if you're looking for this sort of thing in a campaign, Brave Archer is something to check out. Another thing is the martial contests, which we've talked about. Not necessarily, not every fight has to be deadly. You can have a match between characters where their attacks are directed at something else, so that rather than hurting each other, they're just trying to achieve a goal, and and that can get around. If you're in a world where everybody is kung fu fighting, it's easy for people to die, and so if you want to get around that, sometimes a great master might go lenient on a party and just say, okay, instead of having a duel, let's see who can push that rock. Whoever can push that rock in one shove wins the contest.
Yeah, there was a lot of that in this movie, and I like fighting for stakes instead of just we're gonna kill these guys. I think you can get into a rut whenever it's open door kill goblins with every combat. Like sometimes you want it to be like you open the door at the same time as the goblins and you both see the idol you came here for, and so it's more important to rush to get it before the room collapses. You gotta have a little more variety in the goal of your conflict, whatever it is. And I think contests are a good way to achieve that, especially in genre. Like if you happen to be doing like a Wuxia game, I mean, contests are like all the time in Wuxia. So, but I mean, reasonably, you can probably do that in any game. I mean, even in a more traditional Western RPG thing, if you happen to come across Lancelot, maybe he's super not interested in killing you because he's a good guy and you're a good guy, but he still wants to test your mettle. You could spar with him or have a race or something. The archery contest from Robin Hood's a great example of a non-lethal contest that was really high stakes and interesting.
I think any setting where there's some kind of chivalry in play, in Wuxia, it varies because sometimes you have heroes who sort of deliberately violate certain aspects of the cultural norms, but clearly those things are being played to in this story, where characters will often do something like, before they have a contest, they'll set terms. Like, okay, if I win, you have to marry me, and if you win, I'll let you go through this hallway, or there are things like that, and there's, I call it sort of the gambler effect. One of the things I like about role-playing games and rolling dice is sort of the thrill of risk and reward. And so when you set stakes like that, if it's one thing if it's always just death, and death is certainly a big risk, but to also have other things on the line, like if you promise somebody, okay, I'm going to do this really hard thing that I don't want to do, or give up this thing that I don't want to give up, if I lose, that makes the contest very interesting. And I've had players do that, and it's always exciting, because then you don't know where the campaign's going to go after that fight until you know who wins.
Oh yeah, and if you find yourself having a player who does things like that, what a wonderful demonstration of their investment in the game. They're buying into it and doing things like that. It's a rare player, I find, that even thinks they can do things like that. But when you find them, man, treasure that player because they're adding something really fun to your campaign.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And you can also encourage it by having the NPCs, make offers of that nature too. That's, and again, all of this stuff is going to depend on how inventive you feel in the moment. Some nights you might not have it, but when you do, it can be useful. And again, the more of these kinds of movies and books you read and watch, I think the more it just sort of is naturally baked into the back of your brain, where you kind of pull it out, like even now, like when I run a session, some of my sessions are great, some of them not so great, depends on how my mood. But even in my most low energy sessions, I find I'm always able to draw on all of the movies and books that I've seen for inspiration.
That's good advice in general. If you want to be a GM, go and read some cool stuff. Like,
Yeah.
go to that Appendix N and just start going through it. Because it naturally enriches your imagination with the imaginations of all the people that create the things that inspire the game you're playing. It's really really good advice.
And I would say, if you are intending to do a Wuxia campaign, I mean, I'm a big fan of making Wuxia accessible, and so I don't think people have to suddenly master the genre before they run it. But
Oh, I
if you,
don't. I don't have any mastery of it, and I'm going to make some Wuxia, so yeah, I mean, just have some familiarity.
But I will say this. This is one of the defining stories in the genre. So if you are interested in learning about the genre to help you with your campaigns, this is a story to become familiar with. And you can do it in a number of ways. You can just go to the Wikipedia page and learn about it if you want. That'll give you the basic bare bones information. But I would encourage people to read the story first. The story is great. It's a trilogy, and and there are 3 books, and each book has 40 chapters, and they're divided into 4 volumes each. So, it depends on the translation you get. But the fan translations are available widely online, and like I said, there's even an official translation of the first book. The stories are wonderful to read, and one of the cool things is, because they make TV series for these stories all the time, if you want something to kind of help give you fuel to read through the story, like say you're getting a little confused by some of the character names or whatever, try reading the stories while watching one of the television series, because the television series are also usually divided into about 40 episodes. So there's usually a rough approximation of 1 episode or 2 episodes to a chapter. So that can be really handy, both to kind of give you the fuel, but also to help you remember who's who, because you'll have visual image in your head of who's who.
Yeah, as you pointed out, their visuals are pretty set, which makes that a lot easier for recognition purposes.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would say you can start with any of them. You can start with Return of Condor Heroes, or you can start with Heaven Sword, Dragon Saber, or Legends of Condor Heroes. But if you want to do it in order, which is probably advisable, go with Legend of Condor Heroes, sometimes called Eagle Shooting Heroes, then Return of Condor Heroes, then Heaven Sword, Dragon Saber. And I promise you, each one they're distinct enough that they're sort of individual and interesting on their own. And everybody always seems to have their favorite one, but each of them kind of offers something that the other one doesn't. So I mean, and other Louis Cha stories are also worth reading. Other authors are also worth reading, like Gulong. But I think this is a really important one. So I would say you definitely want to probably start with Legend of Condor Heroes if you're just getting into the genre and you want some background information, because I can promise you're going to see a lot of references to the Condor Heroes story if you watch a lot of Wuxia movies, and it's just handy to know what they're talking about. So I don't know. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we head out? We actually got about an hour, so we didn't do too bad today.
Cool. Now, I feel like I might be a little out of my depth with the expertise when it comes to the Legend of Condor Heroes, so I think I'm pretty satisfied with where we left it.
Well, we'll try. We by the end of this, you will be an expert in Condor Heroes. I can assure you. Yeah, there's something deep about this story. There's something real, like at a very basic level, it resonates. I feel like when I first watched Return of Condor Heroes, I had the same feeling I had when I first watched Star Wars. It's that kind of resonance. And I think part of it might be because I think some of this stuff might have actually trickled into Star Wars through very circuitous routes. But also I think it just touches on some really fundamental stuff. And so I especially Return of Condor Heroes, because again, spoilers. I'm going to spoil a big plot detail, so stop listening if you don't want to have that spoiled. But Return of Condor Heroes, the main character loses his arm midway through the story, so there's a really easy parallel to draw there between that and also the hero of the second story is the son of the villain of the first story, so there's that too.
Pretty clear parallels there.
Yeah. But yeah, so we'll let you go, and again, the name of the program is Wuxia Workshop. What do we do these like every 2 weeks or so? Is that our rough schedule that we've been on?
Our schedule, it's somewhere in there.
Yeah, every 2 to 3 weeks, I'd say we do. And as always, feel free to send us questions and comments. We'll try to incorporate them into the program. Both of us design games. I design Wandering Heroes of Ogre Gate, and you have a new game you're working on right now. So why don't you? Plug that?
I'm a member of the Five Emperors, and we're doing Chang Cheh, which is a line of different kind of like superpowered kung fu games. Right now, I'm working on Lone Wolf Fist, which is like the post-apocalyptic / sort of Fist of the North Star one. That's what I'm doing right now.
And can you go into, because I know that I was watching a thread where you were talking about it, and any other details that you want to share about it?
Oh man, I could literally talk about it for another hour, Brendan. You're opening up a can of worms.
Let's just stick it to about 2 minutes. Let's
okay.
A 2-minute version.
Okay, well, it's if you like early '90s like pulpy kind of anime, or even like the stuff that's kind of inspired by that, like Katsuya Terada's Monkey, Akira, by Katsuhiro Otomo, I think does that. Dragon Ball Z, which is a little more zany, but also an inspiration for the game. Fist of the North Star, Vampire Hunter D, Ninja Scroll, which we talked about. Like any of that stuff, that's the stuff that inspires this game. So it's got a certain kind of appealing grind to it, but it's still really powerful martial or magical heroes going through post-apocalyptic wasteland. And that's just this product. Like hopefully with the next one, if we finally get that through layout, which has been kind of difficult. Once we get that one through layout, though, you'll be able to go even further into the stars and do that kind of interplanetary crack planets in half stuff from Ashura's Wrath or Dragon Ball Super and that sort of thing. So mine's a touch higher power level than I think that Wandering Heroes is. But yeah, that's what I'm doing with it. I guess I could talk about this game.
Yeah, and I just got to say, there's some really interesting stuff in there. I've seen a lot of it. Is it available in print yet by any chance, or is it not available in print yet?
No, I'm still, like, there's a document available. There's the really super early playtest, which I call the I Bleed playtest, and I'm working on making a proper playtest for it. I hope whenever I do that to make it available on print on demand, just so if people want to like run it at their table, they can just order it from DriveThruRPG, get the print on demand at rock cheap prices, at like cheap and accessible, and just run it that way. And then yes, whenever I actually get like the proper art and layout done with it, it's going to be hopefully print on demand for a hardback. But
yeah, and I have to say, like, I'm very impressed with what I've seen, and the design is very well. Like, there's a lot of forethought into this stuff that you can clear. Like, is a very thought out system. In fact, I was running a game the other day, and we came upon a moment where one of the players said, "It sounds like a montage moment is called." Like, and I never do. I'm not a montage guy in my campaigns, but I remember you had the montage mechanic, and.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, I wish I wish I had memorized that section because I really would like to try it out. But I didn't feel like I had a handle on it well enough to pull off in the moment because it was like the very last session of a campaign, and I didn't want to bungle everything. But so I want to talk about montage next time. Remind me.
All right, I'll earmark that. Yeah. I wrote a whole section on how to do it, so I'm pretty familiar with it now, and it's like, it's really not, like, thank you for calling it innovative and really useful, but, like, really it's just a codifying of something that I think everyone already pretty much does when they run games. Just, let's skip time forward ahead and have that happen. But
that's a tricky thing. The ins and outs of skipping time can be very tricky in the moment of a game, so I thought it was interesting. And again, we are running out of time, so we're gonna have to end it fairly soon, but I think next time I'd like to talk about that because I have some honest questions that I want to ask about it in terms of making it work at the table, and it's not it's a technique you're familiar with that I'm not particularly familiar with, so I would I would like to see how to do that smoothly in a way that is going to sort of work with what my end goals were for that session. But yeah, so again, we'll be back on, I guess, in about 2 or 3 weeks. Well, I guess we're going to be doing Brave Archer 2, right? Because we're going to do
Yeah, gotta do the whole trilogy at least.
So we're gonna do
man.
So Brave Archer 1, 2, and 3, and I don't know. I think next episode we should also talk about the fact that it is a trilogy. How that would, that's obviously a little bit unusual. So we can get into that too. And tomorrow, I believe we're doing the Chinatown Kid on Wuxia Weekend. So it's Alexander Fusheng month. So this actually worked out really well because Brave Archer stars Alexander Fusheng, and so we're starting our first movie tomorrow with him, and I think we're going to end the month with 8 diagram pole fighters. So we have a good selection of films to talk about this month. And
stay tuned, true believers.
Yep. And all right. So until next time, we'll talk to you later.